U.S Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to take centre stage at the G7 summit in France, carrying with him not just India's priorities but also the aspirations of the global south. From trade and technology to energy security, artificial intelligence, geopolitical conflicts and reforms in global governance, New Delhi is expected to push for a more inclusive international order. The summit also offers top leaders a key diplomatic platform for bilateral engagements with world leaders, including discussions on trade, strategic partnerships and emerging global challenges. Let's get you a ground report by our managing editor, Zaka Jacob.
So day one of the G7 Leaders Summit has concluded right here in Évian-les-Bains, which is the French alpine resort town. U.S. President Donald Trump arrived here this evening. He, of course, had dinner with the rest of the G7 leaders. French President Emmanuel Macron welcomed all the leaders. And, of course, as you would expect, the conclusion of the Iran war was the top topic of discussion amongst all global leaders. President Trump, in his comments to the press as he was meeting President Macron, did mention that the text of the agreement will be made available on Friday, and that J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President, would be coming to Evian to take part in the signing ceremony. He also clarified on 2 or 3 important questions. He said the Strait of Hormuz will reopen right away. He said it's more or less open. The traffic has started to flow again. The oil is flowing, he said. Also, he's clarified on the American money that will be made available for Iranian reconstruction. President Trump has also made it clear that this money will only be available to the Iranians depending on them keeping their end of the bargain. Trump will also separately have meetings tomorrow, which is Tuesday, with the leaders of the Arab countries, some of whom will be coming here to Evian. Some of them have been part of the mediation efforts between America and Iran, so they will be apprising the other members of the G7 as well. President Trump also welcomed the move by some of the G7 members to try and help with their military or naval vessels to escort commercial tankers through the Strait of Hormuz and to ensure their safe passage. France was one of those countries which had agreed to do so, at least had floated that proposal earlier on. But we've seen the statement from most of the G7 leaders, particularly the big Western European countries, France, Britain, Germany and Italy, who have put out their statement, heaving a collective sense of relief, or a collective sigh of relief, because for them this war was really beginning to take a toll on their economies, on fuel prices, on inflation. And President Trump sort of arrived for this dinner meeting of the G7 leaders to a collective sense of a relief, as it were, by all the G7 members. Now, of course, the devil will be in the detail. We've already seen sort of differences of opinion and notes of dissent coming in from Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel has already said that he has repeatedly warned that under his watch, Iran will not get a nuclear weapon, and Israel's defense will be the top priority for him and his government. We're seeing voices of dissent from his extremely right-wing coalition partners like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. But nonetheless, between now and Friday, if there is a relative peace in the Strait of Hormuz and off the Gulf of Persia, then you can be rest assured that on Friday in Geneva, in Switzerland, not very far from here on the other side of the Lake Geneva where we are reporting from, that's where the signing ceremony will happen. President Trump has confirmed that Vice President Vance will be here, and most likely from the Iranian side, Mohammad Ghalibaf, who is the Speaker of the National Assembly in Iran, will be present as well. Reporting from Lake Geneva, just overlooking Évian-les-Bains, this is Zaka Jacob along with video journalist Brij Kishore Mal for Times Now.
And joining us live right now is our managing editor, Zaka Jacob. Hi, Zaka. I mean, before you tell us about the agenda for the day, what we can really expect from France today, where you are present, where leaders from around the world will be coming for G7 summit, I want to ask you, why do such events happen at such pristine locations? Is there some reason behind it?
Well, you know, as beautiful as this place is, and I just heard the report that you just played out, the boat ride between France and Switzerland, between Evian and Lausanne. I've been to a lot of places around the world. This has to be one of the prettiest sights that I've ever seen, the boat ride between France and Switzerland over Lake Geneva. But there's also a backside to it, or flip side to it, and that is these are very difficult locations to access. For us to get to Evian, to the summit venue, it takes about an hour and a half. You have to take a cab ride, a bus ride, a boat ride that you just saw, and then again another shuttle bus ride. So, as beautiful as these places are, it's actually very difficult to access them. In fact, Evian is completely shut off. The local population there, many of them, we were having dinner last night, and they were saying that many of the locals have actually left because there's so much security around that little town that they're not used to this kind of security. So a lot of the locals have just taken off, packed off for the next 3 days. So yeah, there's that flip side as well. But having said that, like I said, it's one of the most beautiful places that I've been to. The boat ride from France to Switzerland was one of the most scenic anywhere in the world. But that does not hide the fact that today, when the G7 leaders meet, of course it will be convened by French President Emmanuel Macron, they will have some really weighty and really difficult issues to try and address. Top of the list, of course, will be the Iran war. You heard from President Trump last night as he was meeting President Macron for the bilateral meeting, and he said that, the deal is done. On Friday, J.D. Vance is going to be in Geneva in Switzerland. He's going to be part of the signing ceremony. And that as far as Trump is concerned, this war is pretty much over. He now wants to focus his attention on the Russia-Ukraine war. He had a meeting with President Zelensky last night on the sidelines of the G7 leaders summit. So as far as Trump is concerned, he thinks this is a done deal. But clearly, it is far from a done deal. You've heard yesterday from Benjamin Netanyahu. He had an address to the nation. He clearly does not buy this whole peace deal. He doesn't think that Iran will keep its end of the bargain. And more importantly for him, I think it seems like he was kept out of this whole negotiation process, and clearly him and Trump are not on the same page. The last time they had a phone call, it was very testy. There were a lot of angry, messages flying back and forth, a lot of expletives used. And I think right now there is a very testy sort of truce between Netanyahu and President Trump, and that will have to last for the next 5 days, because if any untoward incident happens, any kind of attack happens, either in the Strait of Hormuz, or if Israel decides to attack Lebanon, for example, then I think the Iranians will not take that flight to Geneva. So I think it's a very tenuous time right now for the next 3 or 4 days until Friday. You also heard from J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President, who basically said that they are now directly talking to the Iranians, and that there are parts of the deal in Israel which have been welcomed, and there are parts of the deal which have not been welcomed in Israel. I think the Israel-US relationship, they're the two closest allies, that itself is on testy waters right now. Remember, there are also domestic political calculations, both for Trump and for Netanyahu. For Trump, his domestic political calculation ahead of the midterms in November is that this war has to end as quickly as possible. He found himself in a very, very, difficult spot, and this is the best way to extricate himself and extricate America, and he's trying to spin it as a win. I'm not sure how much the American people will buy that spin. For Netanyahu, it's the exact opposite. He feels politically, he too has elections due in October, he feels that the longer this war continues, it just enhances his strongman image. There will be more support for him and to continue this war in Lebanon inside Israel, and that will help him politically in the elections in October. So that's the fundamental divergence, or the fundamental difference between Trump and Netanyahu on this. One wants to end the war and the other does not want to, and we'll see who prevails. Certainly the hope here in France is that at least for the next 4 or 5 days, until the signing ceremony happens in Geneva on Friday, things will hold, the peace will hold, at least for the moment.
Zaka, do you think, this sense of urgency that Donald Trump has shown to, agree to a peace deal with Iran, in a way agreeing to a lot of things that Iran wants America to do at this point in time, just ahead of this crucial summit, is also because Trump will be facing the same leaders when U.S. hosts the G20 summit later this year?
Yeah, but there's one important thing, right, that happens before the G20, which is the midterm elections. And, given where Trump's approval ratings are, given where even some of the Republican folks themselves are concerned about where this war is going, the inflationary effects of this war, if the Republicans and President Trump's party were to lose either the House or the Senate, or even both, there is a distinct possibility they might lose control of both chambers of Congress, then Trump pretty much becomes a lame duck president. So when the same set of leaders, including the ones who are meeting today, meet in Florida in December for the G20, it'll be a very different President Trump, and it'll be a very different set of world leaders, because they will know that the upper hand is with them, because they know that domestically, then for the next year and a half or so, until Trump's term gets over in 2028, he's pretty much a lame duck president. So the hope for the Republican Party is that they can hold on to that slender majority that they have in the House, in the hope that this war gets over. He's got a couple of positive sort of events coming up. He's got the Football World Cup, which the United States is hosting currently. July 4th is the 250th anniversary of American independence. So he's hoping all of these 2 or 3 events sort of bring it back. But fundamental to that is ending this Iran war, and ending it in a way that he can spin to the American domestic audiences that this is a win for America. Like I said, I don't know how much the American audiences will buy that spin, because if you look at the text of that draft agreement, on almost all the points, whether it's the nuclear question, the Strait of Hormuz question, the reparations and unfreezing of the Iranian frozen assets, etc., most of those points, it's Iran that seems to have got the better end of the deal, and America doesn't seem to have. And certainly, look, you know, the other problem that Trump has is that he's the one who's always comparing himself to Obama and the deal that he's getting with Iran to the Obama deal, the JCPOA deal from 2015. So comparisons will be done straight away once the draft of this agreement is available post-Friday, post the signing ceremony. There will be a straight-up comparison between this deal and what Obama got in 2015. And I'm not sure that Trump and his team will be able to sell this particular deal as better than the 2015 deal. And I think that is a big challenge that they will have in the next few days.
Right. And another important thing that, you know, that we'll be watching out for is the meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and U.S. President Donald Trump. When is that? What can really be expected? Because the kind of response we got from Marco Rubio after India raised the concern about the death of 3 sailors in Omani waters, many geopolitical experts were of the view that this could, you know, bring us to a situation where we see repeat of what we saw last year, the way relations nosedived between India and the U.S.
Yeah, look, that meeting is slated for post-lunch tomorrow, which is Wednesday afternoon here in Evian, roughly about 3 o'clock or so local time. It's expected to last about half an hour. Prime Minister Modi will arrive in Evian today in the afternoon around 3 o'clock. He will be at the summit venue, will be received by President Emmanuel Macron. He will attend the Leaders Outreach program, which will run for a couple of hours from 3 p.m. local time till 5 p.m. local time, after which he's got 3 bilaterals with Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada, with Prime Minister Keir Starmer of UK, and of course the leader of the UAE. Those are his 3 bilateral engagements tonight, and then tomorrow in the afternoon is the big one with President Trump. So the sailors issue, yes, it's a very important issue. It's an issue that's caused a lot of outrage amongst the Indian public, on Indian social media, and that is something that the Prime Minister is expected to take up with President Trump. But that's not the only issue. I mean, you know this, the interim trade agreement has still not been finalized. I believe the chief trade negotiator will be visiting India in the next few days to try and iron out the last few remaining differences. Again, we're not sure what the tariff rate is. Is it 18%? Is it 10% now under this Section 301 that the U.S. Commerce Department is threatening to impose? And what is the legal basis for all of this? Remember, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the legality or the legal basis for which Trump was using these tariffs. So again, that matter is pretty much in legal limbo right now. So there's a lot of uncertainty regarding the trade deal, on the tariffs question. Then there is the question of the Russian oil sanctions waiver. Ever since this war began, the U.S. Treasury Department has been giving a sort of monthly waiver for India to buy Russian oil. But at some point, they're going to stop. I mean, again, Trump can very well use the excuse or the ruse of the fact that the war is over and the deal is going to be signed on Friday and stop giving the sanctions waiver exemption. And if that happens, then how does India react? Because India will then have to take the call whether it continues to buy Russian oil. That will have its own consequences from the U.S. Treasury Department side. Or does it stop buying Russian oil? Because that again will have consequences. It will open itself up to domestic criticism. The likes of Rahul Gandhi and others in the opposition have already made an issue of the fact that the U.S. is dictating, who India buys oil from and does not. So it is a bit of a catch-22. if the sanctions waiver were to be exempted, India's stated position has always been that it continues to buy oil from whoever it deems fit. So there's a whole bunch of niggling issues in the India-US relationship. I was speaking to Dr. Rajamohan yesterday, one of the foremost foreign policy analysts in the country, and he says that, look, we have to focus on the big picture while keeping the details relevant as well. The big picture is the most important bilateral relationship that India has currently is still with the United States. He made that comparison. The trade that we have with the US is in excess of $200 billion. The trade we have with France, where the Prime Minister has spent the last few days, is about $15 billion. I mean, that's the scale of the nature of the relationship. Same with the defense partnership, same with the technology partnership. So that's the big picture. It's a relationship that neither side can afford to, forget or put on the back burner. But at the same time, the details are also very important. The details are tricky for both sides, whether it's on trade and tariff, whether it's on immigration, whether it's on, ending the war and reopening the Strait of Hormuz, on the question of who India buys oil from. So there are a lot of issues that need to be resolved in the meeting tomorrow. Whether or not all of them or some of them get addressed and get resolved, we'll have to wait and see. But I think it is a testy phase of this relationship, not least because Donald Trump has chosen to make it so.
Absolutely. We leave it there. Thank you very much, Zaka. Appreciate you joining us and sharing with us all of those details.